Today, I'm going to share with you a publication on exploring students' individual and group presentation assessment. And we're going to start by looking at the general purposes of assessment. Okay, now, what is the whole purpose of assessment? We need to know, provide students with the ability to be responsible for their own actions and productivity. We need to look at various means of evaluating the language other than the regular exams and quizzes. And next, we're going to look at types of assessment. Okay, now we've got diagnostic assessment, which is in the beginning, and then the formative assessment, which is throughout, and then we've got the summative assessment, which is at the end. Now, let's look at how are oral skills assessed. Now, speaking can be assessed in a variety of ways. First, we look at the observational approach, where the student's behavior is observed and assessed in a very pleasant, unnoticeable way, or according to the structured approach, where the students are asked to perform one or more specific oral communication tasks, then they're assessed on them. Let's take a look at the next slide. Both approaches actually use various rating skills systems. For example, we have the holistic rating, which is an overall rating, or the analytical scales where it captures certain areas like pronunciation, fluency, grammar, etc. Now, let's take a look at oral presentation, individual presentation. Now, we've got the oral presentation could be excellent presentation where everything goes all well and the presenter captures the audience's attention. We've got the adequate presentation, which is just fair. And then we've got the inadequate, where there are some various problems. Let's look at ideas for individual presentation. Now, the students sometimes prefer to work alone, but sometimes they may encounter difficulties even when working alone. So we need to facilitate all of this. Let's look at ideas for group presentations. Now, a group presentation is only as strong as its weakest presenter. So if everybody does their thing right, then nobody will suffer and the group will be excellent. So the group can either sink or swim. Let's look at various ideas for assessing group presentations. We can provide students with assignments, for example, or like they have to look at research, and then they're allowed to give a presentation for 5 minutes presentation, and then get them to focus on various things like organization, clarity, grammar, pronunciation, overall presentation grade. Now, we've got some individual and group presentation assessment criteria. We've got the delivery. Next, we have the language. Then we have organization, content, and then evidence of preparation. Let's look at delivery. Now, delivery focuses on their volume, good eye contact, intonation. Next, we've got the language, which focuses on grammar and vocabulary. And then we've got clear evidence of ability to express good ideas. This is language. Cohesive advices are used well. High degree of grammatical accuracy. And then let's look at organization. Now, clear outline, logical ordering of the main ideas, effective conclusion, final wrap-up. Now let's look at D. Content is appropriate and relevant. The topic is explored in very sufficient depth. Next, we've got E, evidence of preparation. Now, evidence of preparation, their familiarity with the topic, they're fluent in delivering, they use PowerPoints and handouts. Next, let's look at things to consider in group presentations. Now, students need to know the purpose of the group work. They need to identify expected outcomes. They need to choose which members are going to be in the same group. We need to decide on the topic and the tasks. Now, they need to understand the assessment instruments and how they would be assessed. Are they going to be assessed as individuals or average of individual grade or as groups? Also, we can have individuals within a group and they all sink or swim. Now let's take a look at some advantages of individual presentation assessment. Give the students the opportunity to be independent. They develop their good organizational skills, time management. Each student does her work and does not rely on others. Let's take a look at some disadvantages of individual presentation. Some students may not be able to work alone. Their workload may be too much for them. This discourages group work. Next, let's look at some advantages of group presentations. It enhances the learning and motivation. It utilizes time, facilitates everything, leadership, dynamics, and it helps them to work together. Now, let's take a look at some disadvantages of group assessment. Now, stronger or weaker students may be at a disadvantage. They could have workload not be evenly allocated. Conflicts may arise between the students. Characteristics of freeloading or authority may arise. They may not like the idea of getting the same grade as the other members of the group. Let's take a look at now at the research study. Let's look at the setting. The project was carried out, as I said a while ago, 5 different classes and from UAE University. Let's look at the treatment and the procedure. Okay, students were asked to choose articles in famous journals and then give individual presentations to share the study with others in the class. Now, they were asked to choose their own research presentation topics. They were asked to form their own groups, and they were evaluated on that. Let's take a look at study number 1, the individual versus the group. Okay, here's the research questions. Here are the research questions. Are there any differences between individual and group presentations? Which one's better? We don't know. Should the teacher, when looking at group presentations, give grades based on individual performance only, or on group, or both? Let's take a look at the results. Now, if we look at the screen, we find that the averages for individual article presentation 16.46, whereas the final group presentation averages 18.02, as you can see. Now, let's take a look at the other slide, individual article presentation and individual within the group. Now, we have individual alone, we have individual within the group, we have the group. The average with the individual alone is 16.5, whereas the individual within the group is 17.9, and the group grade is 18. Next, if we look at the averages, we find that the individual grade in the group is slightly lower than the group grade. And this indicates that students work in groups get higher grades. Let's take a look at study number 2. Here we're going to look at self-peer and peer assessment. The question is there a difference between teacher assessment, self-assessment, and peer assessment, individual and group presentations, or are all of them important? Let's look at the table. We've got the individual average is 16.6, whereas the group average is 17.7. And for the teacher, with the self-assessment, we've got the individual 17.5 and the group is 17.8. Whereas with the peer, it's 17.3 and 17.7. We notice that the student self-assessment is higher even than the teacher. Now, if we compare the results between individual versus the group, when looking at the averages, we will find that all group grades, 17.7, 17.8, and 17 for the individual is 16.6, 17.5, and 17.3. If we compare the teacher self and the peer, okay, we find that the student self, as I said before, is slightly higher than the teacher. So it's 17.8. Next, if we try to find a conclusion to all of this, we find that working in groups can be a very valuable resource for students in class and even after they graduate in jobs, because they need to know how to work with each other. Now, they need to have good planning when making serious decisions to prevent any problems at later stages. And we have seen how the group presentations have more advantages than disadvantages when done right from the start. Now, the little quote, 2002 quote, group work under proper conditions encourages peer learning and peer support, and many student studies validate this. Under less than ideal conditions, in other words, if there's a problem, there's conflict, there's freeloading, there's a lot of stress, and we find that the students have problems. Now, I just wanted to specify that the study was looking at first individual students' presentations as they are presenting alone. Then we've got students who are presenting within a group. So they get an individual grade and then they get a group grade. Now the group grade is the same for all the students. And then we add, so for example, in all the areas, the 5 areas out of 4 out of 20. So they get an individual grade, and then which is different from each other, and then they get a final overall group grade. Then we decide and look at and evaluate the average. So hopefully we can see now that when students are working together, they actually help each other and they work together. So students in the beginning were upset because they get the same group grade, but they also get an individual grade, which is 50% of their whole grade. And this is fair because then they have to work together and help each other. Okay, I hope this study was very useful. Please let me know if you want any more information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you.
Sally. Thank you.